Hello, everyone, and welcome. First of all, a sincere apologies for our delay as we're dealing with a few technical issues here, but welcome to another virtual get-together of the CIES webinar series organized by CIES, the International Center of Sports Studies. An emphasis on the international here, given we tend to have a very global audience. Let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. These webinar discussions are produced in collaboration with the FIFA Master alumni, and I'm back to host our second episode of this season. For those of you who haven't yet had the time to view our first episode, my name is Julian Smith. I'm logged in today from Portugal, and I'm a FIFA Master alumni from the 19th edition, as well as the current president of the FIFA Master Alumni Association. CIES, the organizer of this series, is an independent study center located in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. It provides top-level education, research, and consulting services, and you can find more information about CIES, the CIES Football Observatory, or their education programs like the FIFA Master or the FIFA CIES Executive Programs in the links in the description of this webinar. Today's session is frankly a big one, all about the Olympic Games. Quite possibly the most recognized sporting event on the planet, and certainly one of the most iconic brands. The Olympic Games, both summer and winter, represent the pinnacle of sporting achievement to any athlete in any sport. We're just off the heels of the recently completed 24th Olympic Winter Games, which took place in Beijing, China. An incredible event by its traditional, usual prestige, but even more incredible given all sorts of details around the hosting of and performance at this year's games. Now look, I could share some interesting facts and figures that would probably be of interest, but we are incredibly lucky today to have with us two guests of extraordinary qualifications and experience to give us totally unique insight into everything that goes into planning an Olympic Games in general, as well as some insight into the recent 2022 Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. So with that, let me introduce you to today's panel, starting with Pierre. Pierre Ducrey hails from and lives in Switzerland, having graduated from the FIFA Master 3rd edition. He currently works at the International Olympic Committee as the Olympic Games Operations Director, where in this capacity he oversees the relationships between the IOC and the organizing committees. Pierre holds a master's degree in international relations in addition to the FIFA Master, after the latter of which he spent some months working at the United Nations for the Secretary General Office promoting peace and development through sport. He has since then, from end of 2003, been at the IOC, holding several key senior roles, previously including the head of sports operations and international federation relations and head of Olympic Games coordination. So he brings an incredible wealth of experience that we are super, super lucky to hear from. It's good to see you, Pierre. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Our second guest, let me check with our director here in the background to see if he's been able to join us yet. I don't think he has yet, but I will introduce him regardless because he is an incredible person to join us. So that is Denis Oswald, who will be joining us in just a moment. He is the epitome of a leader in the international sports world, starting from his days as a sportsman, where as a rower, his accomplishments include representing Switzerland at the 1968, 1972, and 1976 Olympic Summer Games, even achieving a bronze medal in Mexico City, 1968. Denis is a qualified lawyer by education, and beyond his sportsman days, he served in past as president of the World Rowing Federation and as president of ASWAF, the Association of Summer Olympic International Federations. He currently sits on the IOC Executive Board and is the chair of the IOC Disciplinary Commission, having previously, among several roles within the Olympic Games universe, sat as chair of the coordination commissions for the Athens 2004 and London 2012 Games. While he's not a graduate of the FIFA Master, Denis Oswald has been a fundamental element to the development of that program and more broadly of CIES, having acted as a director since 2000, since the year 2000 and participating both in the FIFA Master Scientific Committee and in the program as a lecturer as well. Now, this is a long but very succinct summary of his lengthy list of credentials, the full list of which would take me this entire hour to list in detail, but suffice to say, we're all privileged to welcome such an accomplished figure calling in from Switzerland today to the virtual stage. Welcome, Denis. I'm glad to see you here.
Hello, everybody. I hope the technical problem has been resolved. I can see you, I can hear you. That's essential.
Well, equally as well, we can see you and hear you. So welcome and thanks for joining. Technical issues out of the way. So now that we've introduced our incredible guests, I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing from them as much as I am. So the majority of our session today will be a discussion between us, the panel, but our audience always asks us great questions. So please pose those in the chat and we'll leave some time at the end to select a few for our guests to speak to. All right, so let's get straight into it. And let's start at the beginning, really, because one way to get a sense of scale of the Olympic Games is seeing just how much time in advance all of the work that goes into bidding to host the Games endures. So let's break this subject into two parts. Maybe we'll split with Denis. If you could tell us a bit about the traditional general process used to evaluate an Olympic Games bid, and maybe some specific points of interest about Beijing in particular. And then Pierre, if you could give us a sense of how the bid process has evolved over time and what will be different for future editions of host bidding. So Denis, let's start with you.
Okay, yes, what you call the traditional process is the process which has been used for all the previous year by the IOC to select the host city. It was still the case for Beijing. The attribution of the games is made 7 years in advance, but of course the bid committee, the bidding country, will have to prepare their documents long before, 3-4 years before, depending on their own situation. So in the case of Beijing, we receive a bid from the city of Beijing and the National Olympic Committee of China. This bid was reviewed by the technical people at the IOC, and then in the months previous to the session where the attribution was made, an evaluation commission visited China, visiting the different venue to get an assessment of the proposal which was made by Beijing. There was a second candidate, which was the state of Kazakhstan, and at the end, at the session in 2013, the decision was made to allocate the games to Beijing. And this was an interesting decision because Beijing was using quite a number of the Olympic Summer Games 2008 for winter purposes, and it was quite adequate for the IOC policy about environment to reuse existing facilities. On the other hand, China was not typically a winter sport country, but it was at the same time an opportunity to bring more people practicing winter sport in China. And I have the feeling now after the games that this goal was achieved. That was for the traditional procedure without going into more details, and the one again which applied for Beijing.
Yeah, that's great, Denis. So there's a couple of points of interest there that I think we'll dig into a little bit deeper later. But this idea of reusing some of the original IOC, well, the original created venues for the Summer Olympic Games that they hosted, but then also this idea that China didn't really have a winter sports culture, so neither an audience nor athletes to be able to participate. That opened an entirely new door for an audience here. That's amazing. Yes. So Pierre, now if we could go to you, Denis has described maybe what was used in the past, but let's look to the future and see how this has evolved and what will be used as the process for evaluating bids in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. I think it was extremely interesting to hear from Denis because, of course, he's been very involved in those process. But in many respects, the campaign for the 2022 games was also the spark of looking at candidature in a different way. As he pointed out, in the end, there were only 2 cities vying for the 2022 games. And that was something which was not very usual in the context of the games, where the number of cities or countries bidding for the games was in general higher. And that sparked a number of reflections regarding really how you move from a process where tons of candidates are putting their candidature forward and you have to choose, to one where you actually have to go and engage with the cities to explain what the games can offer as a legacy, as an opportunity, and really have a constructive dialogue with all of these cities. And progressively we moved towards this direction where we really are now having a process where it is a permanent dialogue with countries, with NOCs, of course, with cities, provinces, all those that have intention or interest to organize the games, even if it's organizing the games in 2038 or 2040, because sometimes it takes a very long time planning. We want to be available to those conversations. We want to make sure that we are here for them to provide the expertise, that they don't necessarily have to go in the market and source expensive advisors or very important developments prior to really becoming officially in the process. So the big difference also is that where it was before very formal from the very start of the process, now the permanent dialogue is really ongoing up until the very last stage of the process. There is also a flexibility in terms of the number of years that the games can be allocated in advance. It used to be commonly 7 years. Now we've had recently editions of the games like 2028 or 2032 that were allocated 11 years in advance, because the candidatures that were put forward were just right at that moment, had all the tools that we need to have for the games to be successful. So we wanted to have this flexibility at any point in time when the dialogue is leading towards something that we believe is a great offer and opportunity for the Olympic Games, to have the dialogue being concluded by an agreement from the session. So those are, I would say, the major differences, that the dialogue is really permanent and that the decision can be made in a more flexible way when it comes to calendar. Recently, as you know, we appointed Brisbane. They've gone through the process. There was a deep assessment of all of their capacities, and they were deemed to be the perfect candidate for an edition of the Games. But they were the only candidature in that context at that time, and they were approved by the IOC session. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to engage with a number of different entities and to make decisions in the right moment.
That's again incredible insight, Pierre. And I think one point that stands out to me is, given how incredible a spectacle the Olympic Games are in the modern era, there's an increasing complexity in terms of the number of people that need to be involved, and that open communication line is important to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction, not only in terms of evaluating a bid, but then ramping up to the games, which is kind of the next question that I want to ask. So a bid is selected, but what really happens next? Okay, we have open communication, but there's so many people involved. There's the IOC, there's the technical staff, there's the National Olympic Committees, international federations, partners, stakeholders. I mean, how do all of these groups prepare after the games are awarded to a host? Is there a kickoff meeting with 7,000 people in the room? How does it work there? I don't know who wants to speak to that first, but I'll open the question.
Well, I can mention that especially the international federations, as you know, according to the Olympic Charter, they are in charge of all the technical aspect of their sport at the Olympic Games. And therefore, they will start working not just when the games have been awarded, but already before. They will be consulted by the IOC to determine whether what is proposed by the different cities is acceptable, is according to their standard and expectation. And then, of course, when the games have been have been awarded, then they will go into more details with the organizing committee, preparing the venue. Sometimes you will use venues they know because they had previously different competitions, World Cup and so on, at the place which will be used for the Olympic Games. But sometimes, as it was the case in Beijing, everything regarding snow sports were new, and therefore they had to really approve every step which was made, the plans and the constructions of the venue which was made by the organizing committee. And of course, I'm sure Pierre can add also the fact that the IOC was supervising everything from the beginning.
Yes, no, absolutely, Denis. I think going back to your question, Julian, if anything, Beijing demonstrated how much of a team effort the Olympic Games are when it comes to delivery, because with the pandemic and all of the extra attention that was given to all the areas, we had to engage more than ever in the last stage, of course, with the international federations, and Denis knows everything about them, but also with the national Olympic committees, the marketing partners that in many respects play a critical role. Almost all of our partners have a direct role in the delivery. They are bringing services and operational capacities to the delivery of the games. The broadcasters, of course, our entity delivering the signal to the broadcasters, and all of the other representative of the media. Everyone really plays a critical part. And to your question, of course, from the beginning, for each edition, we would appoint what we call a coordination commission, and Denis was chairing two of them. And this is having on the commission a number of representatives from the stakeholder. This is kind of the official body that we have, so that all the stakeholders have a platform to bring forward their key messages. But there is also a number of other forums that exist directly with the International Federation, directly with the organizing committee. We have visits on the ground. We really have a number of vehicles to ensure that all the stakeholders have an opportunity to bring their expertise forward, and very importantly, to be aware of the latest development and comment. Because in all areas, it is very much of a teamwork. And our role at the IOC is, of course, to bring some expertise, but also to make sure that every single entity involved in delivery has the right condition to do its job. Because in the end, only the Rowing Federation, to talk about a sport that is so dear to Denis, knows exactly how the competition needs to take place and give the advice to the organizing committee. When it comes to training condition or accommodation condition for the athlete, the NOCs play a key role. We speak a lot and more with the athlete representation bodies to get their input as well, talk to the broadcasters to understand what the International Broadcast Center need to have as features. So it's a permanent dialogue, and one of our critical role and that of the organizing committee is to orchestrate this dialogue so it can be really effective. And to go back to Beijing in the last year before the Games, I think never before have we engaged as much with every stakeholder to collect their input and make sure that the adapted plans were the plans that could allow to deliver still a great edition of the Games.
It's not by accident that the commission Pierre mentioned is called Coordination Commission, because really the role is to coordinate all the efforts that Pierre has been mentioned. So the name of the commission is totally appropriate.
Yeah, that's a great point of emphasis there. And from what I'm hearing, the IOC kind of acts as a central hub for all of the other experts that need to be involved to have the platform to succeed, right? Whether it's the international federations participating in making sure that the venues are appropriate for their competitions, but then also working with the broadcasters, the marketing teams, all of these other people who need to be involved to put on the success of the games. Even something just like welcoming the guests, the spectators to participate as well, right? So that's again great insight. And Pierre made the unfortunate anecdote that I think we do need to speak about a little bit about the pandemic, because that became a quite obvious, albeit incredibly unexpected challenge that emerged over time. And it obviously had a major impact on Tokyo for Summer Olympic Games as well as Beijing. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. I mean, how did the IOC even react to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic? And how did it impact the preparation for Beijing to host, not only from the IOC's perspective, but then all the other stakeholders, all these other people that we've been talking about? Again, I'll open the question and see. I don't know, Pierre, maybe you want to go first this time.
Yeah, I can, for sure. And then Denis will add. But I think when you are in a situation like this one, where suddenly all of the parameters around delivering an event change, you need to go back to the drawing board and just understand, how do we create the conditions for the event still to be able to take place? When the games were postponed, there were very few events still taking place. So we had to build a process for Tokyo, and then of course as well for Beijing, because putting the games of Tokyo just in front of Beijing, it did mean that we would have to deliver those two games in a very similar way. The recipe for one will be close to the recipe for the other one. And that's the job that we took on a couple of years ago, when it became clear that things will change radically in the environment of the games. And we had to build a process, a logical one, for everybody to understand what we were trying to do. And in that combination, we spent quite some time securing the ability of the organizing committee in Tokyo, because I think we have to talk about Tokyo as well in that respect, to have all the assets they needed, resecure the village, the venues, and the broadcast center, all of that. And after that, and that was applied to both Tokyo and Beijing, you look at what is it that we can simplify in addition to what we already did, to try and make the task, as, if we can talk about that in the context of the game, as simple as possible. Because one thing for sure, the pandemics bring a lot of new responsibilities for an organizing committee, for all the stakeholders. So the work is expanding very quickly. So we just wanted to make sure that we would focus on what really matters. And when you think about the games, you think about sport, field of play. That was really our critical concern from the very beginning. So we did everything so that the plan moving forward would secure that, spending a ton of time to have the best training and competing conditions for the athletes. And after that, once you have this base, trying to add the layer that we could secure with the variable that we knew would come our way in terms of COVID. And once we had this, I would say, we spent the time to build the recipe to give confidence that the games could take place. In many respects, before Tokyo, a lot of people were doubting of the ability to have an event of that size internationally, taking place in a safe manner. And what was an if before Tokyo became more of a how for Beijing. And we did make some adjustments to the recipe, where in Tokyo, after 14 days, you were able to move around. In Beijing, you were not able to ever leave the games-related venues. So we made some adjustments also because we delivered those games at the peak of Omicron, I would say, at least in Europe and North America. So we made those adjustments, but we spent time building scenarios to make sure we had an understanding of what would be the environment in January, February, and according to the evolution, trigger the right scenario. And we had to do a lot of adaptations along the way. And we worked on playbooks, which I think now is a commonly known term, which really defined for each stakeholder the kind of expectations that were set on them and the environment that they would have for the games. And I would say, to conclude, that the key things we decided to do for Tokyo and for Beijing was we would build these playbooks with the stakeholders. We did several editions of the playbook to allow everybody to be aware of, I would say, the higher level parameters, and then the next level, and then the next level, and to engage with them at every turn, at every edition of the playbook, so we could get the input and fine-tune moving forward. So in the end, there was no real surprise for the stakeholders in their preparation and in the delivery as to what the environment was, because they were an integral part of the definition of these rules.
Wow, so much to unpack from what you just offered there, Pierre. I mean, I think the idea of these playbooks is also testament to your increased dialogue between everyone who's involved in this. I know Denis also wants to add to this, but I want to shout out one of our viewers here who's calling in from Romania, Florentina. Please, to the rest of our audience, let us know where you're calling in from, and I hope you've already seen what incredible insights we're getting from our panelists here. So please remember to ask us questions in the chat so that we can pose a few to them. But Denis, I know you have your own thoughts that you want to offer here as well.
Yes, what I would like to stress is how difficult it was to take the decision to postpone the games, because we have to remember at the beginning of 2020, nobody knew exactly what was happening. Even the expert has no experience with this virus. We heard it was started somewhere in China and then it came to Europe, but nobody had an idea of the scope, of the length, of the difficulty we would face regarding. And it took some time for the IOC to make the decision to postpone for a few weeks, and the IOC immediately contacted the World Health Organization as an advisor. And I remember at the time, February 2020, the WHO were telling us, "Oh, don't postpone yet. Possibly it's not a big thing, and possibly you will be able to stage the games next summer." And suddenly we started to understand that the problem was much more serious, and experts started to get more knowledge about the situation. And then in March, we understood that there was no way that the games can take place on that year, and then started all the process to determine how to postpone. We needed agreement of the Japanese government, of the organizing committee, of many stakeholders, and then started all the work Pierre has been describing to find a new dates, a new time, to renegotiate all the contracts we had with hotel, with the venue owners, etc. I don't want to go into more details, and Pierre has explained how difficult it has been. But the beginning, I mean, to take the decision was really the most difficult decision. And I have to stress that the main reason why the IOC insisted to find a way to stage the games was to protect the athletes, because, as you know, the participating in the Olympic Games for an athlete is the pinnacle of their life, sporting life. And if we would say, okay, no games, it would have been much easier for us. But our mission is to organize the game, stage the game, and they would have meant that a full generation of athletes who have prepared for the games would have to wait another 4 years to participate in the games. And of course, it was not possible for many of them, being too old, being not motivated, not supported, or whatever. And it's why we wanted to make sure that we don't lose a generation of athletes, but that every athlete having prepared for the games can participate and have their chance. And this was the main motivation.
Yeah, very well said. I think it's hard to think now, but looking back on that time was so strange in all senses of life. Nobody knew what was happening, and thinking about putting on a mega event of this scale must have been incredibly difficult. But Denis, if I could stay with you, because Pierre made this interesting point that Tokyo served as almost a platform to create stepping stones to policies that were then applied in Beijing for the Winter Olympic Games. And I know you have some insights that you can share to us about the bubble concept that was applied in Tokyo, and then how the bubble was applied in Beijing. Could you kind of tell us about how Tokyo was applied, and then the learnings from that led to Beijing as well?
Yes, I think we all learned a lot from the Tokyo experience. Tokyo has created this bubble system. Each venue was considered as a bubble, so you had to fulfill a number of conditions and tests to enter the bubble, and then you were free to move within the bubble. But if we would go after you visit to one venue, go to another venue, you had to enter another bubble and again be tested, temperature and then everything, and your bag search, and as it is normally at the games. The concept, the bubble concept that Beijing applied was different, was an extension, I would say, from the Tokyo system, because all venues were connected as one bubble. And you will ask me why and how, for example, the ski venue in the mountain 2 hours away could be included in a bubble, which was basically in Beijing itself, the different venue for the ice events. The principle was, the concept was I would say simple to understand, certainly not easy to create. But for example, our hotel was one bubble, and we had to fulfill a number of health conditions to be allowed to enter the bubble, and then we could not leave the bubble during our stay at the games, but we could move within the bubble. That means move to another venue, like let's say ice hockey, which was not far from the hotel, through a mean which was part of the bubble. That means a transportation mean which was considered as a bubble. That means I have, for example, a personal car, personal driver who was living in the bubble, sleeping in the bubble, and this car would take me to a venue which was part of the bubble. So being in that protected car, I was never leaving the bubble, really. I was just entering another room of the bubble, and then back to the hotel, and then the next day maybe going to the mountain for the ski event. But always with my car, my driver who never left the bubble. He was sleeping in the bubble as well, and then could go there without any specific check in the mountain, because we were again in the same bubble. I hope my explanation was clear enough for people to understand. But it was a great system, because it was it restrict a lot the test we had to make. And personally, of course, we were tested every day at the hotel, so that if somebody would have become positive, this person would be isolated. But actually, because of the system was very tight, and everybody was carefully checked before entering the bubble, there were no cases within the bubble, because we are all clean, all negative, and therefore nobody could be infected.
Yeah, Julian, if I can add to this, maybe just to say, there were a few cases, Denis. We had 0.02% positivity rate in the bubble, mostly because some people came in, went through the first test, and were still negative, but already had the virus and developed it in the first couple of days. But the key really is that you identify the people at the very start of their infection, so that they are not infectious already for other people. And that's what we managed pretty well during that whole time, trying to make sure that we could handle the cases in the most immediate way possible, so that there could be no cluster, and that we could identify as early as possible those that were going to be likely to become spreaders of the virus. Just to maybe summarize in a couple of sentences what Denis was explaining very well, and as the experience he went through, the goal was really to create a system with two populations that would not meet. So you had the organizers, including a number of Chinese on one side that were inside that closed loop that Denis was describing. And then you had the Chinese population outside of this closed loop, living their normal life. And the system was meant for us never to interact. And those entering the closed loop had to go through a number of tests, including if they were Chinese. And to come out of this loop, as is currently the policy in China, those that stayed in China mainland had to take another time of isolation, a number of tests, just to make sure that they were safe before they were returning to the country, so that there was no chance for the two systems to interact with one another, and there would be no reason for the games to create any kind of concern for the Chinese population, or the reverse. So that's why we devised the system in that manner, so that there could be no confusion regarding where any problem could come from.
Yeah, really fascinating. I mean, anecdotal kind of instances for us to help visualize, something that it hopefully won't be long term. We hopefully won't be dealing with this pandemic for several future editions of the Olympics. But the reality is, this is a great example of all of these other things that you are mentioning, the continuous dialogue between all of the different stakeholders, the need to continually analyze the situation, to learn from previous instances of the games and apply new updated procedures, methodologies, whatever, to create a more, to facilitate everything, and all the participants, spectators, stakeholders who are involved in the games. Really fascinating example, again, that I think demonstrates this anecdote, but then also more broadly how the IOC is becoming more nimble in its approach to organizing the games. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about before the games are held, and then during the games, some of the different procedures that are in place. But let's talk after the games now. The preparation's done. The athletes have taken the field and taken home their medals, and it's kind of time for the IOC to look back on the event. And how does the IOC as an organization begin to measure the success of an Olympic Games? I mean, there's tangible things like financial costs and benefits, but this concept of legacy, I think, is really important to highlight, and it's a very specific word in the Olympic context that I think would be great to explore between you, Pierre, and Denis as well. And I think, again, we mentioned this component that Beijing was the first city to host both a summer and a winter Olympic Games, if I'm not mistaken. So if we kind of unpack all of this, how does the IOC look back on the Games and measure its success from all of those elements?
Denis, I'll let you start, maybe.
Well, legacy is a really serious concern for the IOC, because in the past, it was difficult for the IOC to impose organizing cities to consider what will happen after the games. Although we were telling them, don't build too big, don't build too much, think of what you will do with your building. But cities were saying, well, we are at home, we pay for it, and we know what we need for the future. And very often this was wrong, and we had no real means to force them to change their plans. And with this so-called Agenda 2020, there was a provision saying that the IOC will look at the legacy aspect and make sure that we use or reuse existing facilities, even if this forces to spread the games over a bigger area. Usually, in the past, we were happy to concentrate everything at the same place, and it was rare to find all the facilities needed for the games. They were not necessarily existing, and therefore cities have built facilities which were useful for the games, but no longer after the games. This is, according to the new policy, no longer possible, and we will force city not to build what is not needed for the future, to consider that existing facility can be reused. And typically, as I mentioned before, the main venue which was built for the summer games has been transformed for Winter Games purposes. The swimming pool became an ice rink, etc. So this is a good way to make use of what has been built and of the money which has been spent to create these facilities.
Thanks, Denis. Yeah, Pierre, let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think Denis touched a lot on one thing which is really important is the hard legacy, the actual brick and mortar that stays after the games. Definitely now the process, because of the reasons we touched on at the beginning, the constructive dialogue, the understanding much earlier on of what the venue is built for. We have no interest in building a venue for 16 days of sport. What we want to understand is what it will be done for the 60 years after that in many respects. And to Denis' point, one of the challenges today it is to force a city not to build sometimes. There is a lot of political, economical interest sometimes to have large projects that can give jobs and opportunities to companies. We had long debates about the sliding center in Pyeongchang, for example, that we were not supportive to build because we were not convinced about the legacy plan. It was built anyhow because they felt they would be able to make it a cost-effective venue. But we always have those strong indications now given by the IOC that the preference will be where there is no guaranteed legacy to have a temporary solution, or even, as we open the door to in the new norm, a venue being located abroad. If you don't have a venue, you can look at further away, and that's the case. For example, the 2026 games will be built on a model where venues are quite far apart, located in many different cities, because those infrastructures are already existing, and that makes a big difference. So that's for the hard legacy, but there's also a lot of criteria of success to measure the impact of the games, which are more connected to what we call soft legacies. So what is the participation in sport in that country? China set out as an objective to have 300 million people participating in winter sports, and in 2015 already, as they were starting to have benchmark and tracking progress of number of people coming to the infrastructure that they built in advance of the games, they started to see the growth, and I think we reached already 346 million at this stage, which is a huge number. Of course, not in a country like China, but for people having interest in winter sport and practicing, this is a huge legacy for all of the winter community. It's about also elite sport. China obtained medal in these games in competitions they had never even performed decently before. So the incentive of the games and the program they build really allow to bring new athletes to sport and new performances to be achieved. For us at the IOC, we also look at what are the legacies, and in addition to what will truly transcend China's sporting landscape. I think our president concluded the game saying that China is now officially a winter sport, because it wasn't really before. They never had any snow activities and so on, whereas now they have a community willing to go to winter sport resorts and participate. But that's really important. But if we look at it on our side, we also introduced a lot of new events, mixed events. We had a record women participation, also a record number of countries obtaining medals. So a lot of things which are very important for the universality and the success of the Winter Games. So it's a very comprehensive set of measures that you need to look at. Very importantly, and then he touched on it, in the host country, because if you're the next host country, you want to understand what is it you get by organizing the games rather than simply getting a fantastic festival of sport. But in the aftermath, you really need to have an understanding of economic impact, positive economic impact. What is really the economic of the games? And we spend quite a lot of time to explain, as part of these permanent dialogues with the cities, that the economic impact is very positive. The budgets on the operational side have always been balanced. It will be the same for Beijing. But you also have investment going into opportunities for people to do more things, and that's also very positive. So all in all, we only really consider the games are successful when you put together all of these criteria, and we have a number of people in the IOC whose job is solely to understand those criteria and make sure that the cities, the countries after the games continue to work on them. We now have in Rio, for example, a mayor that was the mayor at the time of the games, was then replaced and came back in his capacity, and is really transforming the legacy in the way it was supposed to be in the first place, and this is very good to see.
Yeah, amazing comments from you both here. And again, what I'm hearing is, there are the hard legacy, as you both described, the brick and mortar, but then there's also this component of inspiring people to use that infrastructure that has been built for the sporting spectacle and beyond, for generations in the future, not only to create that culture, but then also have people use those facilities. And now I'm reflecting also on my FIFA Master lessons and the notion of Pierre de Coubertin's idea of creating a sporting society and the importance of a sporting culture to bringing people together and being healthy and all of these things, and how the IOC is using that in practice today. And I think we've seen that to great emphasis recently, and especially with Beijing, having reused some of the facilities, repurposed for winter sport, but then also ensuring that people will be using these facilities in the future. We could go on this topic for a very long time. We're coming to the close of the session, so I want to open again to our audience. Please keep your questions coming in, but I want to ask one that was touching on something that Pierre actually just spoke about, which is the introduction of new sporting codes to the Olympic Games. As you alluded to, several new mixed events. I think we had Big Air for the first time this year at the Winter Olympic Games as well. So could you talk about, from an organizational standpoint, what kind of analysis goes into deciding whether a new sporting code is integrated into the Olympic Games, whether it's winter or summer? Because I think we've seen a lot of really interesting new sports come in. So I'll open it to either of you that feels ready to speak to that.
Denis, you want me to go or you want to go?
Whatever you prefer.
Well, I can start and then you can comment, because you've been part of some of these conversations and approval. But in the same way as we look at selection of host cities with a commission, there's a commission in the IOC called the Olympic Program Commission that is also kind of a permanent observatory in close connection with the International Federation of what is attractive out there as a new event, what really has a proven universality, a very high level competition with a decent calendar, so credible as becoming a sporting event on the IOC competition schedule. And it's an ongoing process. It looks at sport, it looks at discipline, which are like the sub parts of a sport. For example, in the skiing federation, you have cross-country skiing, ski jumping. So we look at all of these pieces, and there's a number of recommendations and exchanges happening between the different entities up until the point where you approve new events going into the program. We also gave the opportunity to OCOGs now to propose additional sports in the context of their country. So we will see, for example, in Milano Cortina for the first time, ski mountaineering that they have chosen to add to their program. But you will also see new events. You mentioned Big Air. I do think we had Big Air in Pyeongchang, but we didn't have freestyle skiing Big Air. So that's the introduction that we had in Beijing. So we continuously look to understand what is appealing, also what may not be so appealing anymore. We published recently the criteria for the review of disciplines in advance of the LA Games, for example, to see if some of these parts of the program that have been there for a long time maybe deserve to be looked at and possibly make room for other events or have a format change. So it's a very dynamic process that looks to keep at the same time the tradition, which is making the game so unique, but also opening up to additional events or sports that are very appealing to new audiences in many ways.
Yes, I have not much to add because I think Pierre's description was very complete. the fact that organizing committee have the opportunity to propose sport which are popular in their country is a good way to test this sport, because quite often they are also popular in other countries. And for example, we had surf, and surf will come back in the next games in Paris, and you can imagine that in Los Angeles it would be quite logical to have surf again. So that means we will have surf at 3 consecutive games, and this is a good step for them to prove the value of their sport, the interest that they can create, and I can imagine that it would be a good way for surf to be definitively included in the program of the game. So that's certainly a way also to make sure that we keep in touch with what the people, the TV viewers and the youth of the world wants to see at the games.
And Julian, if I may just add one thing to say that one of the opportunity we also have on our side to improve the program and experience new events is the Youth Olympic Games. And we are very much using that event to test new concepts, new event. In many respects, the addition of several mixed gender events in Beijing came from what was done in a number of the winter edition of the game. So it's also an important platform for us and the International Federation to experience and understand really what those events can bring to the program.
Yeah, really fascinating. Again, there's a whole other set of Olympic Games dedicated to youth that provide this testing grounds to see what works, what doesn't. Not only for new sporting codes, but for several things amongst the IOC programming, as I understand. But we've come to the end of the hour here, and our guests have been incredibly generous with their quite busy schedules. So we'll have to call it a close for today. Thank you both so much for taking the time and sharing all of your candid insights. To our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, have a look through the library of videos through the other 2 seasons of this series, where a variety of different topics were discussed, many of which feature more FIFA Master alumni. You can also have a look at the FIFA Master alumni YouTube channel for our Latin American webinar series. Tomorrow we have an episode featuring an absolute superstar of our community in Nicole Moore, who will be talking about the globalization of the National Basketball Association. But for this series, the next episode will be on May 10th. So please stay tuned to hear about the topic and who the new exciting panelists will be via the CIES social media channels. But once again, a sincere thanks to our panelists and also to our viewers from around the world. Our guests have been amazing in sharing all of their experience. So thank you both very much. And I'm wishing everyone a wonderful day and looking forward to our next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Denis. Thank you, Julie.